Welcome to Truth and Consequences with Doug Poppa, episode number 28 for October 25th, 2020. On October 27, 2016, Sidney Land, 21, and Nehemiah Kauffman, 20, were found dead in their southwest Las Vegas apartment. Both had been shot in the head. The police said they were killed in a 24-hour time period prior to the discovery of their bodies. I was told that police personnel who were on the scene immediately after the bodies were discovered had disclosed some key facts in the case to the media that compromised the investigation. Less than 3 weeks before the murders of Sidney Land and Nehemiah Kauffman occurred, Shane Valentine, a convicted felon and longtime Las Vegas pimp, an associate of Nehemiah Kauffman, threatened the lives of Kauffman and his girlfriend, Sidney Land. On October 8, 2016, at 5 o'clock a.m., Shane Valentine pulled out a gun and threatened to kill Sidney Land, her girlfriend Frankie Zappia, and Nehemiah Kauffman at the parking garage of the Red Rock Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas. Valentine was upset with Kauffman because Kauffman had something that Valentine wanted back. The police were not notified at the time of that incident. More on that later in this podcast. That same day, October 8, 2016, several hours later, Shane Valentine shot into the occupied residence of Alethea Kauffman, Nehemiah's mother, believing that Nehemiah was inside the residence, which he was not. According to a Las Vegas Metro Police incident report that I obtained, on October 8, 2016, police officers responded to a report of a firearm being discharged into an occupied structure, which was the residence of Alethea Kauffman. Mrs. Kauffman reported that about 11:40 a.m., she was in her house with her daughter and her grandson when they all heard what sounded to her like a car backfiring, and went outside to see what the noise was and saw no one in the street. They stated they noticed a hole that looked to have been made from a bullet on the north-facing wall where one of the bedrooms was located. Since they had seen or heard no one when they checked outside, they both went back inside. About 5 minutes later, they stated they all heard what sounded to be a car ramming into their garage door. When they went back outside to see what was happening, they again saw no one on the street or anything suspicious in the neighborhood. Again, they walked back into the house. About 5 minutes later, they all heard 4 to 5 more gunshots, but again, by the time they got outside, there was no one in sight. The police officers subsequently interviewed the neighbors. One witness said he heard a gunshot, and when he looked toward the Kauffman residence, he saw a gray sedan in front of the house, according to the police report. The vehicle drove away and returned about 20 minutes later before leaving again. Another witness heard a loud noise that sounded like a gunshot and saw a silver Toyota Camry with tinted windows stopped in front of the residence, according to the police report. A black male got out of the car and threw several objects, which were possibly rocks, at the residence. The black male then fled in the vehicle at a high rate of speed. A third witness observed a black male in his 20s with a thin build and a goatee arrive in front of the residence, according to the police report. The black male was accompanied by a white female who was seated in the passenger seat of a silver Nissan sedan. The black male used the term, quote, "Neo," unquote, as he yelled and challenged the residents. The black male then said, quote, "Come out, you're a dead man," unquote. The witness said he then heard a gunshot. The black male got into the Nissan sedan and fled the area at a high rate of speed. The police noticed a bullet hole on the second floor, a broken window also on the second floor, and a damaged garage door. The patrol officers secured the scene according to Las Vegas Metro Police policy. According to another police report that I obtained, a patrol detective and a crime scene analyst arrived on the scene of the Kauffman residence. They documented the scene with photographs and collected evidence. There was a bullet hole on the second floor east-facing bedroom. The bullet perforated the east wall of the bedroom, struck the ceiling, and lodged in the attic. The bedroom window was broken, and a large rock was recovered from the bedroom floor. There were tire impressions leading to the garage door, and the lower portion of the garage door was damaged. A Nissan emblem was left at the scene, which was also recovered by the crime scene analyst. According to the report, the patrol investigations detective spoke to Mrs. Kauffman, and she said, quote, "Neo," unquote, was the nickname for her son, Nehemiah Kauffman. She said Neo hadn't lived at the residence since June of 2016. According to the police report, the patrol detective contacted Neo, and he said he did not recognize the description of the suspect and claimed he did not have any issues with anyone and declined to meet with the detective for an in-person interview. Remember from my previous podcast, Las Vegas Justice Court Judge Melanie Andrus Tobiasen said that this crime was not followed up on, and less than 3 weeks later, Judge Tobiasen said Shane Valentine, Dominique Thompson, and Frankie Zappia committed the murders. According to a police report that I obtained in 2019, the following items related to the October 8, 2016 shooting into the Kauffman residence were in the possession of the Las Vegas Metro Police Evidence Room: 2 pieces of plastic, a car emblem, a boulder, and a bullet. There is nothing out of the ordinary with that because, as indicated in the police reports, a crime scene analyst responded on October 8, 2016 and recovered evidence which would be in accordance with proper police procedure. More so, when shots are fired into an occupied residence after a suspect had yelled, quote, "Come out, you're a dead man," unquote. The only problem is, the bullet that was in evidence was not recovered from the Kauffman residence on October 8, 2016. That makes no sense at all and appears contrary to proper crime scene investigative techniques. What is important here is that the bullet was not recovered from the Kauffman residence on October 8th. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department participates in the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives National Integrated Ballistic Information Network, commonly called NIBIN, which is a program to help incarcerate armed violent offenders. When police recover shell casings and/or bullets from a crime scene, they are submitted to NIBIN, and the forensic analysis characteristics are entered into a database to aid law enforcement during criminal investigations, to link firearms that are used in various crimes. A suspect threatens someone's life, shoots into a house with people inside, the police knew a bullet was lodged in the attic, and then they leave the crime scene without recovering the bullet, which could later be used to identify the firearm and/or the suspect who fired the weapon if found in their possession. Further, once a bullet is entered into the NIBIN database, it possibly could be a match to other bullets fired from the same weapon in other crimes, i.e., drive-by shootings, murders, etc., and help solve those crimes. So, for a crime scene analyst not to recover the single most critical piece of crime scene evidence of the Kauffman residence makes no sense at all, and in the least, chain of custody would be compromised should the bullet be recovered at a later date, which in this case did happen, after the murders of Sidney Land and Nehemiah Kauffman were discovered on October 27, 2016. Here is how all this went down. According to a Las Vegas Metro Police declaration of warrant that I obtained in 2019 that was filed on October 31, 2016, and requested by Las Vegas Metro Police Homicide Detective Mitchell Dorsch for the arrest of Shane Valentine on that same date, Dorsch refers to the events outlined in the police reports that I have detailed previously. Dorsch's warrant for arrest reads in part, quote, "On October 27, 2016, your affiant and Detective Grimmett were assigned to investigate the death of Nehemiah after he was found deceased. 2 friends of Nehemiah suspected Shane Valentine was a possible suspect. Valentine is a 24-year-old black male who was known to Nehemiah. The friends told detectives that Valentine was the person responsible for shooting the residents at Neo Kauffman's mother's house. On October 28, 2016, a forensic examination was performed on Nehemiah's cell phone. Your affiant and Detective Grimmett noted several text messages between him and phone number 702, redacted, which belonged to Valentine. The text messages were from October 8th and revealed Valentine was upset with Nehemiah. Valentine sent Nehemiah several text messages that contained death threats that were directed to both Nehemiah and his girlfriend. The text messaging started well before the shooting and appeared to conclude at approximately the same time the shooting was called into the LVMPD. At about 11:26 hours, Nehemiah texted Valentine that he was at his mother's residence. Valentine replied he was at the residence too and demanded Nehemiah, quote, come out, unquote, several times. At approximately 11:29 hours, Valentine texted Nehemiah for the gate code, and Nehemiah responded, quote, 6736, unquote. Valentine continued to text Nehemiah to come out. At about 11:51 hours, Valentine sent Nehemiah 2 text messages that read, quote, "Check your garage, pussy," unquote, and, quote, "Look at your garage," unquote. At about 11:52 hours, Valentine texted, quote, "I ran right through your garage," unquote. At about 12:15 hours, it appeared Nehemiah sent a text message to another person which read, quote, "This nigga shoot my mom shit up and ran into the garage," unquote. This was after patrol officers had arrived at Mrs. Kauffman's house and the suspect had fled. Later that same day, Urafian conducted a records check and discovered Valentine had porn activity on the date of October 8th shooting. Valentine went to the super porn and sold an item at approximately 17:29 hours. Urafian contacted super porn management personnel and requested a copy of the video surveillance from the purchase. The business had both internal and external video surveillance. The video surveillance depicted Valentine arriving at the store in what appeared to be a silver Nissan sedan. Valentine left in the same vehicle. It appeared Valentine was alone when he entered the store. On October 20th, 2016, Urafian and Detective Grimmett received Valentine's call detail records from October 8th. At approximately 11:25 hours, Valentine's cell phone hit off a cell phone tower located near County Route 215 and Cheyenne Avenue. Then at approximately 18:32 hours, Valentine's cell phone hit off a cell phone tower located near County Route 215 and West Centennial Parkway. These 2 calls suggested Valentine was driving toward the victim's residence. At approximately 18:44 and 18:57 hours, Valentine's cell phone hit off a cell phone tower near Russell Street and Garrison Street. The cell tower was less than 3/4 of a mile north-northwest of the victim's residence. At approximately 12:02 hours, Valentine's cell phone hit off a cell phone tower located at 7375 Tuley Springs Road, which suggested Valentine was leaving the area of the shooting. Wherefore, declarant prays that a warrant of arrest be issued for the suspect Shane Valentine on the charge of discharge firearm into an occupied structure, unquote. Detective Dorsch had returned to Mrs. Kauffman's house after the murders with a crime scene analyst, and the bullet was then recovered from the attic and submitted into evidence on the October 8th case. So, it was detectives from the Homicide Bureau that linked Shane Valentine to the October 8th shooting and immediately obtained an arrest warrant for Valentine on that charge based on probable cause that was developed by their investigative efforts. On November 15, 2016, Valentine was arraigned on that charge and subsequently agreed to a plea deal and was later sentenced to Nevada State Prison. No one to date has been charged in the murders of Sidney Land and Nehemiah Kauffman. Now that I have explained those series of events, what has never been explained by the Las Vegas Metro Police to this day was why wasn't the bullet removed from the Kauffman residence on October 8, 2016? The single piece of evidence that could link a firearm found in the possession of a suspect to the crime was not recovered that day, also compromising the evidence chain of custody. Multiple media requests that I have sent to the Las Vegas Metro Police on this matter have gone unanswered. What I found even more disturbing is what happened during the grand jury testimony when the Las Vegas Metro Police crime scene analyst who left the bullet in the Kauffman residence testified. Last year, I obtained the transcript of proceedings and exhibits from the November 29, 2016 Clark County, Nevada grand jury that returned an indictment against Shane Valentine, charging the crime of discharging a firearm at or into an occupied structure. Keep in mind that the grand jury occurred after Shane Valentine was arrested on the warrant that Detective Dorsch had obtained. Valentine was apprehended in California, where he fled after the murders, in the same vehicle that he had used on October 8, 2016, when he rammed it into the garage of Neo's mother's house. Among the grand jury exhibits were text messages that were exchanged between Neo Kauffman and Shane Valentine on October 8, 2016. During the text message exchanges, while Valentine was threatening to kill Kauffman, Sidney Land, and Kauffman's family members, Kauffman accused Valentine of being a snitch. Kauffman texted Valentine, "You the cops, homie, you. I heard you a snitch, bro. From the people you say mess with you most, bro, you crazy. You burnt. Burnt in street slang terms means snitched off to the police. Strap in street slang terms means gun. Fade means kill, and clip means kill. Valentine texted Neo, quote, I need that strap, period. And I'm gonna clip your bitch. Fade, pussy. I'm gonna make your bitches watch. Fade. Fade now or get popped later. I'm going to your mama's house. I'm coming to Sid's job. I'm at your mom's. You disrespect me, I'll kill you. And you let that bitch talk about your own nigger like that, I'm gonna fuck you up for that too. I'll put my gun down and mangle you myself. I'm gonna kill your mom and brother and bitch if you don't run the fade. I came to your mom's, open the garage. Fade, nigger, open it, unlock it. You can shoot when I walk in, open up. I'm outside, you wanna shoot? I'm not alone, Joe's here, Day-Day here. Check your garage, pussy. I ran through your garage, go look. I'm gonna run into the house next. Answer, ho, front door. Mark DiGiacomo, Chief Deputy District Attorney, questioned Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department homicide detective Jared Grimmett at the grand jury. The following are excerpts from Grimmett's testimony. DiGiacomo, during the course of that, is there conversations about come inside the house, Neo threatening to shoot him if he comes in the house? Grimmett, yes, Neo represented himself as being in the house even though he wasn't physically at the house. He represented a Shane Valentine via the text message that he was there. So part of the text message communication between Nehemiah Kauffman and Shane Valentine is come on inside, come inside, I'm here waiting for you, come on in here, I'm sitting here waiting for you. I'll kill you, I'm not going to let you kill me and my family. He represented as if he was there in the house, although he wasn't. And the text messages continue. Valentine is asking Neo, just come on out. Come on out and face me like a man. He makes reference to fading, a street term for killing or making someone fade away. So Nehemiah Kauffman is telling him to come on in. He's challenging to come on inside the house, and Shane Valentine is saying come on out so that you can get faded. DiGiacomo, during the course of the conversation, does Mr. Valentine indicate that he has a weapon as well? Grimmett, yes he does. Grimmett, in summary, the conversation between Mr. Kauffman and Mr. Valentine started out discussing the possession of a firearm. Mr. Valentine was attempting to obtain a firearm of some sort, and he uses a lot of street lingo when they're referencing the firearm within the text messages. As the communication continues, it was obvious that Mr. Valentine became very upset over Mr. Kauffman's failure to respond to his text messages and phone calls, and as they grew angrier and angrier, eventually starts to threaten Mr. Kauffman. Specifically tells him he's going to kill him. He says he's coming to his mother's house. He threatens to go to Mr. Kauffman's girlfriend's place of employment. He goes back again and says, I'm headed to your mother's house. Mr. Kauffman is acknowledging these things, that he's receiving these text messages, and he kept telling Shane Valentine that he's tripping. There's no reason to act this way. You need to calm down. I don't know why you're doing this. And as the conversation continues, Mr. Valentine continues to grow angry and eventually says, I'm at your mother's house, I'm here, bring your ass out here, I want to kill you. Eventually he runs the car into the garage, and he acknowledges that on the same text message and says, come out and look at your garage, you should come see it, come on out. I'm going to come in here, be a man. It just continues over and over and over, the threats of Nehemiah Kauffman's life, to the life of his family, his mother, his friends, Neo's girlfriend. They're all parts of this, the threats that are going back and forth between the text messages between Nehemiah Kauffman and Shane Valentine. Also, from Grimmett's testimony, we know that after the Land Kauffman murders, Shane Valentine deleted the threatening text messages off his cell phone from October 8, 2016, and then got a new cell phone number either before or after he fled Nevada for California. The text messages were recovered by the police. Valentine didn't flee Nevada after the October 8th incident when he shot into the Kauffman residence, but he did flee to California after the murders, like I said, in the same vehicle he used on October 8th. Pamela Weckerly, Chief Deputy District Attorney, questioned Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department crime scene analyst Gabrielle Guerrero at the grand jury. Weckerly, you were working as a crime scene analyst on October the 8th of this year? Guerrero, yes I was. Weckerly, Were you the only crime scene analyst who responded to that scene? Guerrero: yes, on that day I was. Weckerly: and when you got to the crime scene, what were your duties in terms of documenting what had occurred there? What did you do as a crime scene analyst? Guerrero: as a crime scene analyst, there I took notes of what I observed on the scene and photographs of what I observed at the residence. Weckerly: and did you collect any evidence? Guerrero: I did. Weckerly: do you remember what it was that you collected? Guerrero: yes. In the driveway there were small gray plastic pieces that looked like they belonged to a vehicle in the driveway. On the other side of the garage door there was a Nissan emblem that was also gray in color. Weckerly: do you remember if you saw a rock or collected a rock from there? Guerrero: there was a rock in the bedroom. It was photographed at the scene. Weckerly: was there damage to the garage that you captured or that you would have documented photographically? Guerrero: yes, there was. There was damage to the lower portion of the garage. It looked bent into the garage. It was not straight. The frame of the garage was slightly bent with gray markings on the exterior portion of the garage. Weckerly: now let's look at Grand Jury Exhibit 4. What is depicted in that photograph? Guerrero: this is showing the address of the residence as well as a break into the window, and that was above the garage of the southeast bedroom. And there's also an apparent bullet hole that was above that shutter to the side of that damaged window. A bullet hole, yes it is. Weckerly: bullet hole. Now did you take any steps to go inside the residence to see the path or where the bullet might have gone? Guerrero: yes I did. This is the inside of that bedroom along that east wall where the bullet hole went straight through and then into the ceiling. Those pink stickers there are just showing where the bullet holes are at, just because they were higher up in the wall and ceiling, and they are marked as A1, and that is on the east wall, and A2 into the ceiling. Weckerly: so the projectile itself, or the bullet, that is in the ceiling. Guerrero: yes, that is correct. Weckerly: and did you recover it on the 8th? Guerrero: I did not recover that on the 8th. Weckerly: now you mention that you collected various items of evidence on one side of the garage and then sorted the other side. Guerrero: that is correct. So on the driveway there were vehicle pieces on the driveway, small plastic pieces, and on the other side of the garage there was a Nissan emblem on the inside of the garage on the floor. Weckerly: I think that concludes the questions I have for you. Thank you very much. And grand jurors have any questions? Grand juror: to Guerrero: you never recovered the bullet? The actual bullet, right? Guerrero: no, I did not. Okay, here's some comments on here. Like I said before, this is a major problem and a red flag with me. Why the juror had to ask Guerrero that question and not Weckerly, the prosecutor, raises some very serious concerns. Guerrero, the crime scene analyst, left the residence without recovering the single most important piece of evidence relating to shooting into an occupied dwelling, the bullet. Why didn't Prosecutor Weckerly have crime scene analyst Guerrero explain to the grand jury why she did not retrieve the bullet from the ceiling of the Kauffman home on October 8th? I have seen these crime scene analysts work, and they are meticulous. It makes no sense. If a suspect is later apprehended with a firearm, and the police want to match the bullet from the residence to a particular firearm, how are they going to do that when the bullet was never recovered? This was bad police procedure, to say the least. Did someone at the scene tell Guerrero not to retrieve the bullet? And is that why the prosecutor did not follow through with Guerrero? Also, the chain of custody on the bullet was compromised. My police experience aside, I spoke with several retired Las Vegas Metro police detectives about this, and they all told me they never heard of anything like that in their life. They all said that the bullet should have been removed from the ceiling and entered into evidence on October 8, 2016. And if someone at the crime scene had told the crime scene analyst not to retrieve a piece of evidence at a crime scene, the detectives who talked to me stated that the analyst should have called their supervisor immediately to the scene. Mark DiGiacomo, Chief Deputy District Attorney, also questioned Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department homicide detective Mitchell Dorsch at the grand jury. DiGiacomo: In addition to that, did you learn about an alleged discharging of a firearm event that occurred at Mr. Kauffman's mother's home, which is depicted here in Grand Jury Exhibit Number 3? Dosh: Yes, I did. The Giacomo: And did you decide to go back there with crime scene analyst personnel and locate the bullet that had entered the home and lodged into the ceiling attic area of the residence? Dosh: I did. And specifically, it was on October 30th of 2016. The Giacomo: And were you present with the crime scene analyst when that ceiling was cut open and the projectile was actually recovered? Dosh: I was. The Giacomo: I'm going to show you what has been marked as Grand Jury Exhibit Number 13. Do you recognize what's depicted in that photograph? Dosh: I do. It's the bullet that was recovered from the ceiling area. The Giacomo: Ladies and gentlemen, that completes the presentation of the evidence, and we would ask you to deliberate. But before you do, I would like to instruct you that you have heard evidence that Mr. Kauffman, Neo Kauffman, died. It was only provided as information to you to explain how it is that the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department came into the custody of Mr. Kauffman's phone and thus had it downloaded and learned the other information that you learned here. Any suggestion that Shane Valentine may or may not be involved in any other criminal activity, if you read those text messages, it may suggest to you that there may be other things. None of that is offered or may be considered by you to believe that Mr. Valentine has any character or propensity for violence. It was only offered to give context to the communications that are occurring between Mr. Valentine's phone and Mr. Kauffman's phone on October 8th, the day of this particular incident. Can everybody follow that instruction? Okay. Detective Grimmett testified at the grand jury that when Shane Valentine was apprehended in California, he did not have a firearm. I obtained a copy of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department report related to the Land Kauffman murders. Listed on that report in the property section is a stolen Smith & Wesson semi-automatic firearm, model number SD9VE, serial number HFP6330. Whether this firearm was recovered from the apartment where Sidney and Nehemiah were found murdered on October 27, 2016, or the firearm was added into the report at a later date because it may be associated with the homicides, is unknown. Shane Valentine and Nehemiah Kauffman were allegedly involved in home burglaries together. When Valentine was asking Kauffman for the gun in those text messages, it is possible that the firearm listed in the police report as stolen could be that weapon. I can assume that the bullet retrieved on October 30th, 2016 from the Kauffman residence that was fired by Shane Valentine on October 8th, 2016 was not a match for the bullets that were fired into Sidney Land and Nehemiah Kauffman. Why the bullet fired into the Kauffman residence on October 8, 2016 was not recovered by the crime scene analyst remains a mystery to this day, and that in itself is more than troubling. Is it a case of police negligence and incompetence, or something much more nefarious? Either way, it stinks to high heaven. Remember, I said this in a previous podcast. Steve Land, Sidney Land's father, after the crime scene was cleared by the police, went into the apartment to retrieve his daughter's belongings and found evidence left behind by the police in the same blood-stained master bedroom where Sidney Land was murdered. Is this another example of police incompetence and negligence, or is there something else going on here? I have to ask that question. The entire scenario is just unbelievable to me. I wonder if the same crime scene analyst, Gabrielle Guerrero, who left the bullet in the ceiling at the Kauffman residence, was she involved with the double homicide investigation? I said this before and I will say it again. You do not leave evidence at a crime scene. Apparently, though, with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, they do. In February of 2019, I conducted an on-the-record recorded interview with Ariane Zappia, the sister of Frankie Zappia. The following are excerpts from that interview. Just to note, the game is street slang for prostitution. Damo is Dominique Thompson, a convicted felon who was the pimp for Frankie Zappia.
October, I believe either the 7th or the 8th, I'm not 100%, I don't really remember exactly what day, Frankie called me freaking out because Shane Valentine had threatened to kill Frankie, Neo, and Sidney at the top of Red Rock's parking garage.
Okay.
And Frankie was freaked the fuck out. She's like, I took He kept calling Sydney's phone after we drove off, and I finally answered, and I told him he was a bitch and all of these things, and Frankie is saying that she told these things to Shane from Sydney's phone. And Frankie said that it was over a home invasion that Neo, which was Sydney's boyfriend, and Shane had did, where Neo kept a gun and some weed and didn't give it to Shane, and Shane had threatened them and said that he wanted his portion of the shit and Neo shouldn't have kept it, blah, 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 all of this stuff. And Frankie began, they all were very scared. I know that because Sydney was crying, Frankie was freaked out. I'm in California. There's literally nothing I can do. But I'm like, you need to call Mom. Like, Mom can protect you. Dano's a cop. You know, that I'm telling her, like, I don't know what I can do for you. And she's like, no, I don't want to get Mom involved. Neo's dangerous. She's like, I have to go. Something happened. And I'm like, call me later and let me know you're okay. And I'm completely bothered. A couple hours later, she calls me and tells me that Shane is threatening to shoot up Neo's mom's house if Neo doesn't give Shane what's Shane. Sorry, my cigarette keeps going out.
Okay.
And she's like, I have to go. I'm calling Mom. So Frankie calls my mom. I don't know what happens. I know that Frankie ends up at my mom's house doing laundry again. I don't know what their phone call was. I wasn't there. Frankie's doing laundry at my mom's house, and my mom calls me, and she's like, Shane just shot up Neo's mom's house. And I was like, what the fuck? Is everybody okay? Where's Frankie? And she's like, Frankie's here doing laundry. Sydney's at work, and I don't know where Neo is, but I know Frankie and Sydney are okay. I'm like, okay, well, that's good. And, you know, it's fucked up to say, but I did say, you know, I don't really care how Neo is as long as Frankie and Sydney are okay. And I know that sounds fucked up, but I wasn't attached to him. So there was no emotional attachment for me. And in my opinion, it was his fault why my sister and Sydney were in jeopardy. And so the house gets shot up, and Frankie's like talking about it. And there was rumors that Frankie was the girl in the car with Shane Valentine. Now, Frankie and Shane have had no relationship since high school. And when I say relationship, they never dated or anything like that. Shane pimped out girls in high school, and there are rumors that Frankie was under Shane Valentine. Now, there is no actual proof, and the reason why I say rumors is there is nothing to prove that was there at that time. Social media wasn't big for them. It wasn't the way it is now. There wasn't pictures galore of them. It wasn't anything. It was more so a word of mouth thing, and I'm not going to say anything that can't be proved to be fact. So there was speculation at that time that Frankie was under Shane Valentine along with Morgan Levitt and a couple other girls that when all of them went to Kayla shows, they all went to Centennial High School, the same group of girls. So that was the last time that Frankie and Shane Valentine would have had any form of relationship.
Excuse me for a second. You mentioned somebody named Kayla. Who's that?
Kayla shows is who was best friends with Frank, one of Sydney and Frankie's best friends in high school, which is another prostitute.
Okay.
Which, from my understanding, was one of the first girls that got Frankie into it. She was a prostitute in high school. That group of girls are all from Centennial. They're all pimped out, and not Sydney at this time. I know I referenced her, but this is in high school. Frankie kind of kept it a secret that she was a prostitute at the time. She led us to believe, she led us to believe that she worked at, what was the store called? Hurley. She told us she worked at Hurley, and for a year it actually worked because she said she worked at the Hurley in the outlet mall on, I think, Charleston or whatever it is. None of us ever went there, so we never thought anything. Well, one day, me and my mom, we actually decided to go down to the outlet mall, and we asked the people at the desk for Frankie, and they were like, Frankie, she doesn't work here. And we're like, oh, she's not working today? We thought she was working today. They're like, no one named Frankie works here. So we call Frankie, and we're like, hey, we're at Hurley. Where are you? We thought you were working. She's like, oh, they transferred me to the Hurley at Prim, the outlets out in Prim. I'm like, oh, okay, no big deal. It's a secret. 2 years into her being a prostitute, we actually find out that she's actually a prostitute. And how we found out is Sydney was actually in the garage with us. She was at my mom's house at the time. We're all sitting in the garage. Frankie's not home. Sydney's waiting on Frankie to get there, and a warrant comes in the mail because my sister's mailing address was actually my mom's house. Frankie didn't live there. Her and Kayla lived in their own apartment on Rainbow at the time, right by the Walmart down there. They lived in an apartment literally right next to that, and the warrant comes in, and my mom comes outside, and she's crying, and I'm like, what's wrong? And Sydney's sitting next to me, and she's like, you can't tell Frankie that you know this. And I'm like, that I know what? And she hands me the piece of paper, and it's a warrant, and the warrant is an outstanding bench warrant for solicitation inside of a casino. And I'm so oblivious at this time. I've just had my child. I'm like, what? This is 2013 at the time. Mm-hmm. No, I'm sorry. This is the beginning of 2014. My son was just a baby. I had him the end of 2013, beginning of 2014, and I'm like, what does this mean? And she's like, my mom's crying, and my stepdad, Dano, he comes outside, and he's like, well, in terms of legalities, this means that she is a prostitute. And kind of all the hamsters in my head started turning, and I'm like, a prostitute? Like, it makes sense how she can live on her own on, just working part-time, as we believe at Hurley, and how she went from, dressing normal to having Louis Vuitton purses and Michael Kors, name brand things, and she's paying my mom in cash for my mom and Frankie were, and she was co-signed with my mom, and she's paying my mom like 3 months at a time in car payments, but in cash on a Hurley income, and kind of everything comes together, and Sydney freaks the fuck out, and Sydney's like, what the fuck? She's a prostitute. Well, my mom tells Sydney, she's like, don't say anything. Frankie's going to be here. We're going to act like we don't know anything. I'm going to address it with Frankie. Whatever. Well, if you know Sydney, she's a very blunt, straightforward person. So Frankie comes into the garage, and Sydney's like, so you're a fucking prostitute. Just like that, clear as day. And I'm like, oh, fuck. Like, my mom just clearly said, don't do this. Sydney did it, and Frankie is stopped in her tracks, and Frankie starts crying, and she breaks it all down, and she was not at that time under Domo. She wouldn't tell us for a while, which through Sydney, we actually found out that at that time she was under a pimp named Styles. And
what's his
we
name?
found that
what
out.
was the pimp's name?
Styles.
Styles?
That was his nickname. Yeah, that's his nickname. And just some young fuck. And the reason why we found that out is Sydney was so pissed at Frankie and told her, I don't want anything to do with you. This is disgusting. I don't approve of this. Like, how could you fucking do this? Really mad about it. And one day, I guess, at like 2 o'clock in the morning, Frankie called Sydney because Frankie didn't know who to call. And Styles had just stomped my sister's head and literally beat her ass and stomped on her head. Frankie's face was super swollen, bruised. There was blood pouring from her face. And she called Sydney. And she told Sydney she needed her to pick her up and take her to the hospital. Or no, I'm sorry, rephrase that. She wanted Sydney to pick her up and have her dad, because Sydney's dad is a firefighter / paramedic. And she wanted Sydney's dad to look at her and see if she needed to go to the hospital, because she didn't want us to know what happened. And if she ended up in the hospital, we would know someone beat her up. Again, she doesn't live at home, so it's not like we would see her come home and look like that. And Sydney picks up Frankie, and she calls me. And Sydney's hysterically crying, and she's like, I don't know what to do. Frankie won't let me take her to the hospital. I went to pick her up. Some guy named Styles comes outside, starts yelling, you're not fucking taking my bitch. That's exactly how Sydney said it to me. And all of this, I was like, Sydney, take my sister to the hospital. Go. There's probably something wrong with her. If he stomped her face, she could have damage. She needs to get looked at. I understand she's scared. We're not going to be mad. We want her to be okay. And she's like, well, I'm just going to have my dad look at her and see what happens. I don't know if they ever followed through with that. I do know that a few hours later, Frankie posted on Snapchat, and her face, again, was super swollen, but the blood is gone. And Frankie's taking like 6 Xanax at this time. Like, she's just got a mouthful of Xanax, and she's being crazy on Snapchat. And that was pretty much the last time we saw Sid for 2 years. So now we fast forward to 2016 again. We're in about April or May at this time, and Frankie gets arrested on a DUI. Driving under the influence, but it was Xanax. She gets pulled over. They found 2 Xanax bars in her car. She was running a red light on a left turn. And she gets pulled over. She fails a sobriety test, and they put her in jail. this is actually April, I'm sorry. She gets out, she goes to court, they order her to do classes and pay a fine, and all is well. Well, the second court date comes up when she's supposed to have finished the classes, the morgue visit, and her community service. She's done none of it. So they give her one more extension. Now we're in the beginning of June. Roll around to the beginning of June. Frankie completely skips out now on this court date, and she gets arrested in the casino on a trespassing this time, because now she's been 86. Now we're 4 years into her being into the game. She's been 86 from every casino on the strip. She gets caught in one of the casinos trespassing. They see she has an active bench warrant for this DUI that she's not handled, paid any of the fines, etc. So they lock her up, and Frankie goes into jail for about 4 months at this time. Frankie's in jail, and Frankie had reached out to again, Frankie and Sydney weren't talking, but Frankie would call me and my mom from jail, and she would tell us, and now we're in 2016, so she's she's under Damo. And Frankie would call, and she would ask, can you guys give Sydney can you guys ask Sydney if we can talk to her? She doesn't have to put money on her phone. I'll take care of it. I just want to be, and so we get to this time. Well, Sydney hasn't been around. She's periodically texted and asked, how's Frankie? How's she doing? She knew she was in jail. We had told her. And Frankie's telling us at this time, I'm done with the game. I don't want to live like this. 4 months in jail, you're off drugs. You're away from the lifestyle. You've got a right track of mind. And Frankie told us, as well as Sydney, the same story, that the day Frankie would be released from jail, my mom would pick her up. Frankie would live back home with my mom. My mom would help Frankie get a normal job. And, we had this dream, again, that Frankie said to us, that she was going to live a normal life. And I was so excited because Sydney was going to be back around. And Sydney was the only true friend that my sister ever had. And I felt like that this was such a good step in the right direction. And Frankie finally had clarity. And she would, I would get my sister back because the game changed her. And I was thrilled. Well, now fast forward to the day she's released, and I don't have an actual release date off the top of my head for the legitimate date she got out of jail. I know it was in June or July at some point, because she got out of jail, and Damo is the person that Frankie had pick her up from jail. So immediately, heartbroken, devastated, she's not following through with anything that she said. And she told us she was just going to go to Damo's to pick up her stuff, and she would be home in the morning. And at that time, I told my mom and I told Sydney, I was like, we can't hold our breath. There's a good possibility she's not coming back. And sure enough, this is how my sister ends up convincing me to go into this lifestyle, because now we're right at the time frame. She's out of jail. She's back to making money. She's back to doing cocaine. She's just back to being an altogether wild fucking person. And Sydney is back to being Frankie's friend at this time. And in the beginning, when Frankie went back into it, she didn't admit to anybody that she was doing it, but now she's driving a Lexus. She's got the name brand car. She's living in Rhodes Ranch now. It's very apparent without her confession what she's doing, because she doesn't have a job. And she told my grandmother that she was a receptionist at a nail salon. Obviously, you can't afford that lifestyle as a receptionist at a hole-in-the-wall nail salon.
Some closing comments before I end this episode. Shane Valentine, a convicted felon and longtime Las Vegas pimp, has never been charged by the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department for sex trafficking, despite the fact that for years he has pimped out the underage daughters of judges, police officers, and countless other daughters of Las Vegas citizens. I find this fact utterly disturbing. What I find even more bizarre than that is Shane Valentine also pimped out the daughter of a Bonanno crime family soldier. A soldier in the La Cosa Nostra, also known as the Italian Mafia, is a made member of a crime family. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. Back then, and maybe things have changed in the Mafia, you did not mess with the family of the made member of the Mafia. Their family members were off limits. So how did Shane Valentine not only escape scrutiny and arrest for sex trafficking by the Las Vegas Metro Police for years, but apparently he was hands-off by the Mafia also? I cannot figure that one out. Follow Truth and Consequences with Doug Poppa on YouTube and Facebook. Thanks for listening, folks.